Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us for our weekly retail data extravaganza. I've said it, it's too late, I've said extravaganza. What we do every week is we dig into the retail data that we've been tracking for online retail. So we are IMRG. IMRG is the online association for retail in the UK. And I always get a bit worried when I say that we're an association. I always feel that it feels a little bit boring. But we're not boring. I think we're probably the most fun association in the UK. We're even more fun than the Fun Association. If there's a national fun association, we'll go toe to toe with that association any day of the week. And what we're going to be looking at today is the easing of lockdown restrictions that happened as of the 4th of July, which was when the pubs and the restaurants and all that sort of stuff started to ease up. Now, you might be thinking, well, why? You know, I can understand that when the high street opened, maybe that had an impact. But the reason that the lockdown easing there is quite interesting is because while we've been in lockdown, you haven't had many opportunities to spend. So you haven't been able to go out and do things, couldn't go on holiday and all that type of thing. So online then would have benefited quite strongly from that, even while the economic situation is so terrible. But now that those things have actually opened up, what we need to look at is whether the spend has been diverted to that stuff. So if people stop doing quite as much spending on some of those areas now. And it's quite a short lineup today, actually. So we've got quite a lot of stuff to show you. There's I'm going to look at straight away the impact of lockdown restrictions. So what happened with online retail sales? Were they up? Were they down? And how did that compare with recent time? Then I've got two guests with me today from Safe Charge and Remarkable, and we're going to look at what we can do as the competition around online spend grows to sort of maintain some of that stuff. And then at the end, I'm going to show you the data in a slightly different way, and I'll explain that when we get through it. Now, I have to warn you in advance today that I've got some very complicated information to show you. The story is quite complicated. And therefore, I'm going to have to look at the data in lots of different ways. So hopefully you can keep up, but you know, fire in questions if I'm confusing you, because as I say, it is quite technical today. So moving on to our first bit there. So me, there's a picture of me when I had slightly shorter hair. As you can see, there's something amazing going on top of my head at the moment. So I'm Strategy and Insight Director at IMRG. What we do is we track online sales for 200 retailers. We track the online sales for multi-channel retailers and online-only retailers. And we have a whole data program around that. So I'm going to show you a load of stuff today that you might find very interesting. And if you think to yourself, well, you know, it seems great, I'd like to know a bit more about that. We have loads more. You know, you can join us to get access to a load of that. So don't ask me. Go to our website. There's there's people you can talk to there. But first of all, we're going to get into our feature here, a regular feature now, which is what stat in Mulcahy's ear. Give me a little shake and then tip me to the side like that. Something falls out of my head because there's lots of stuff in here. You see, but you have to give me a shake if you want to get it out. The stat that I've pulled out here is online sales growth for May 2008, when it was up 30%. Okay. Because that was the last time that we saw plus 30% or over for online sales. Now, if you go all the way back to 2008, think what the internet was back then. Broadband only came out around 2004 or so. So websites really were pretty naff back then. I don't think we really optimized sites back then. I think we just had sites, and that was kind of it. Whereas we've been now through this whole thing, and of course the industry has got a lot more mature and the growth rates have come right down. But if you look at the chart then that falls out of this, these are the growth rates that we've been sort of more used to in recent years. So that's the growth rates for online sales for those years, 2009 through 2019. And if you look at the last sort of 5 years, with the exception of 2016, really you're looking at around 10 to 12%. And then in 2019, wasn't a terribly good year. Growth was actually 6.7%. So to be up 30% month after month at the moment is pretty weird. And I'm going to show you, because that demand has been artificially inflated, we didn't think we were going to be in this situation, how it's going to kind of settle down. That's the question we're addressing today, really. So moving into the first thing I'm going to show you then. First of all, I just want to reappraise you with what happened when the shops reopened. So this was the 15th of June, if you recall. So what this chart is showing you is the year-on-year growth rates for a 7-week period. And I've shown you the first 4 there, which is weeks 21 through to 24, which is 17th of May to 7th of June. And as you can see, the growth rates are very, very strong. So it's sort of between 30 and 45% really. So these are very, very strong and not what we would normally see. It's the pandemic it was the pandemic what done it. But then what happened when the shops opened, you might have thought, maybe that's going to have a big impact and people are going to go back to the shops and therefore online demand will drop. But this is what actually happened. It was actually the strongest growth for online that we'd recorded since the pandemic came into force. So it went really, really strong there. And then the subsequent 2 weeks after that, it was roughly around the same kind of area that we'd seen it. So far, really, we haven't picked up anything really notable about demand shifting back to store and online demand coming down. There are caveats to that. It does get more complicated than that. But so far, so strong. Now I'm going to show you some slightly different stuff. What's driving that is multi-channel retailers. Okay, so that blue line across the top there, this is online sales growth for multi-channel retailers, the blue line, and the online only retailers, which is the orange line. There's a massive difference between them, as you can see. The online only ones doing pretty well, up about 10-15% week after week, but the multi-channel ones are sort of 50 to 70% up. So massive growth. So why is that? All the shops are closed, of course, so you've got nowhere to turn. But even now that they're open again, the growth is actually still really strong. So in that week where the shops opened on the 15th of June, as you can see there, the box that we've highlighted, that was really, really strong growth for the multi-channel retailers. Again, the strongest that we'd seen since the lockdown came into force. And then it kind of fell away a bit the subsequent week, but then it's back up. So if you look at the trend line, which is that red dotted one that goes across it, actually it's more or less the same as it has been. So it hasn't really come down yet after the shops opened. I think it's worth looking at the next chart as well, which is showing you this over a slightly longer period. Now this is year-on-year growth for each month of the year, 2019 and 2020 year to date. So the blue line is showing you 2019, and what happened in 2019 was it was a very weak year for growth. We thought it would be better than this. But actually, as the year unfolded, as you can see, April, May, June, all the way through to sort of September, it was kind of 5% or below it. It sort of flattened out in April entirely. This isn't really the sort of thing that we've been used to in the index. You do get a bit of up and down, as you might expect, but it was a very weak year. And then there was a very weird Christmas where we thought it was going to be, the demand seemed to be really weak all year. And then Christmas, of course, was absolutely explosive. Certainly Black Friday was far, far stronger than we thought it would be. And then, so that kind of brought the year up to be stronger than it was. And then you move into 2020, and as you can see, the first 2 months of the year, completely flat. And then March, there was a bit of a tidal effect as we went into lockdown and people were a bit panicked, maybe didn't spend anything because they were getting worried about their jobs and things. And then you get this massive explosion in growth where the line shot up to 30, nearly 35%. So the point I'm trying to make with this is it's all about demand. And in the last year or so, that demand has been very, very weak. And then that's got changed by the pandemic. It's artificially inflated it. So what we're going to try and do now is work out, is this going to settle down and what's the pattern that it's going to go into? So what's happened now that the further restrictions have eased? What's the last week of data that we've got in, fresh off the bat stuff? Year-on-year growth rate as restrictions are eased then. You see on this graph here, that is the 7 weeks leading into this week. So as you can see, it's reliably sort of 30% plus week after week after week, and sometimes getting as high as 45%. So what happened week 28, which was the 5th of July, the day after all the lockdown restrictions eased? So it went down a little bit, but it's still very much within that range. So it was up 31%. Okay, so lockdown restrictions eased. It doesn't look like people stopped buying online necessarily. The growth was still very strong and where it's kind of been within that exact same range. Now, it does get a lot more complicated than that. And this is what I mean about the sort of technical side of it. So with this growth, what I'm going to show you is the week-on-week growth rate. So if you look at that, there's eight weeks there. And what it's going to show you is for each of these weeks, was the spend more or less than the previous week? So if you run the 2020 blue line there, that is showing you the story there, okay? So as you can see, the y-axis, the range of it is about up or down 10% kind of thing. It's not massive changes. which you might kind of expect week from week. Now, if you look at the far end of that, so that week 28, it was down really rather a lot compared to the previous week. So there was a drop of about 10% there. If we compare this with 2019, so that same period in 2019, that orange line you see there, it's very difficult with week-on-week stuff to get a really reliable pattern, because things can change. So if you look at things by a month compared to the same month last year, that's quite a big frame of time, and you would expect to be able to note trends within that. Week on week, you can get big changes. So if you imagine 1 week of the year you get a heat wave, and then the same week the next year you don't have a heat wave, well, that's going to impact what people are interested in buying. Ditto if there's rain, or if there's some kind of big national event going on, or that kind of thing. Or there's a massive sale that you did that you didn't repeat this year. But at this kind of aggregate level there, what you can see, the two lines on the 5th of July, they are both in negative, they're both in the 5 to 10 range. So you think, well, okay, maybe that's not a massive difference. But actually, if you look at the orange line, between week 27 and 28, that was slightly positive, so it was up about 1%. Whereas the line in 2020 was down 10 percentage points. So it is quite a sharp drop. But let's look at it in a slightly different way. Like I said, this is a complex picture that emerges here. This is week-on-week growth rates by category. Okay, so this is pulled out, I don't know, 10, 11 of the categories that we search here. And again, it's the week-on-week growth. So with each of these weeks, was the amount spent, was it more or less than the previous week? And there's a couple of things I just wanted to point out to you there, a couple of interesting things that are going on. The brown line, the one that sort of plunges all the way to the bottom on the 28th of June, week 27, and then comes back up again, that's garden. Garden had an absolutely incredible spring, when we had the hottest spring ever, the sunniest spring ever. And aren't we paying for it with the July weather, aren't we just? So I think that there were certain weeks in that where there was 1 week certainly where garden was up 400%. Okay, this isn't the normal sort of thing that we see. So as you can see, that the growth there is kind of slowing down a little bit. It's quite an interesting one to watch that. I do wonder with some of these categories, although I think all of these categories are going to be at an elevated position. Some of them might see a bit of slowdown. Electricals is the green line, if you can see in the middle there, and that one is kind of coming down. I'm going to show you that in slightly more detail a little bit later. But if we put a box around week 28 there, which was last week, so the 5th of July, this is the day after the lockdown restrictions eased, there is something interesting here. Every single one of those categories is in negative territory. Every single one of them, except one. And that one is women's wear. So the orange line that's gone up like that, clothing hasn't had a particularly good time throughout this pandemic. If you've been watching these, if you've been with us some of these weeks, then you'll know that clothing's been pretty suppressed. But women's wear actually was up about 18% last week. So what does that mean? I mean, I guess it's one of those things you could say, perhaps now that the restrictions have eased and you can go out and have a bit of a night out, you can have a meal and things like that. Perhaps that kind of wear has become a little bit more appealing, so that people can get dressed up and get outside, for a bit of a change. Not so much happening with menswear, but I think men, we just don't really care what we look like, do we? As evidenced by what you see right in front of you here. So very notable shift going on there. On to the next slide. What I wanted to show you here as well, talking about how these things settle down or don't settle down. This is the month-on-month growth rates throughout COVID. Okay, so we have sort of 5 months that I'm going to show you here. So what month-on-month means is, was the amount spent in March higher or lower than the amount spent in February? Was the amount spent in April higher or lower than that spent in March? And so on and so forth. And then if we run the 2020 line, that's what happened in 2020 so far. So you think, okay, what does that mean? If you run the orange line, you can see what it means. With month on month, I mentioned with week on week. Now, you can get some quite big differences with week on week because things can change in a short period of time. When you're looking at months, they generally are a little bit more reliable. So if you look at February and March, for example, the lines aren't exactly the same, but they are roughly in the same sort of ballpark. Now, what tends to happen really throughout the year is you'll get, most of the time, it will be roughly within the same range, so follow a kind of pattern. So if you imagine in September, there's more spending in October than September, so month on month it goes up. There's more in November than there is in October, so it goes up. So that's expected, that's a Christmas type thing. But look at April here. There will be a couple of times a year when you see a little bit of a difference. So perhaps the trend was for positive one month and then suddenly it goes into negative. That is a notable change. Happens a couple of times a year usually, but you don't get a 30 percentage point change like you do in April here. That is just a monumental kind of change there. But then if you look what's happened after that, May aligned a little bit more, and in June actually, it was hardly very different at all. So what's kind of interesting to note there is perhaps April was the time when it got really, really pulled up that growth. And then if it settles more into a sort of reliable spending pattern as we would normally see, you're doing that from a much elevated kind of position. So, you know, we don't know, it's early days, but could be an interesting thing if that comes in. So I've got some quite good news here, actually. Clothing, if you've been with us, as I was saying, clothing week after week has been negative throughout the pandemic. Not once has it been into positive territory. And the reason for that is reasonably obvious, I suppose. We're in lockdown, couldn't go out, no reason to kind of buy new clothes, and that's been a real problem. And I think, as you can tell from where the baseline is on this graph before we even roll the line, you can tell that some of it's been fairly negative. But look what's happened this week. It's finally gone into positive. So negative all the way through, week 25 there, nearly got there, but not quite. But then this year, for the first time in months, actually recorded some positive growth. So it was up 3%. So, you know, it's not astronomical stuff, but at least it's the right side of that line finally. And that'll be some welcome relief, I think, for retailers. So stuff opening up, you can go out. Maybe that is the start of clothing coming back. And it's kind of interesting to speculate what might happen with those growth rates that we've been seeing, bearing in mind that that's all being dragged up by several categories that we track: beers, wines and spirits, beauty, and home and garden, electrical, all that big stuff. But clothing and footwear, clothing particularly, is a very big category because so many retailers sell into that category. And if that starts to get into positive territory now and people start doing their buying online over shops, which you can imagine because of the issues of trying on clothes and, you know, going in confined spaces and things that people might have a problem with, it could then really shoot this stuff up. So clothing might have been a slight sleeping giant here. Here's hoping. So I think that brings us to the conclusion of that bit. I'm going to come back with some more graphs a little bit later to show you the difference in millions spent. So that very complicated stuff that I showed you, but in a slightly more complicated way indeed, just to really give you the sort of story what's going on there. But now what we're going to do is we're going to have a little bit of a chat. So hopefully if you're I don't know, frustrated with listening to my voice because I'm quite annoying, we've got some people to bring in. So Bradley and James. Bradley, since you've appeared first, you've won the ticket to introduce yourself first.
Afternoon, everyone. Thanks for having me, Andy. Very excited to be on. So I'm Brad. I'm the strategy manager at Remarkable. I look after our development strategy and consult with a lot of clients on their e-commerce tech and retail strategies. For those not familiar, Remarkable are a software as a service e-commerce tech vendor. We offer our core proposition is an e-commerce platform, the full technology suite to support e-commerce businesses. Been around for about 20 years, based in Nottingham in the Midlands. We work primarily with UK retailers across different verticals, mostly fashion, but also in jewellery, sportswear, a few B2B retailers as well. So we have quite a broad reach of markets and size of retailers that we work with. So the past 4 months have been quite eventful, to say the least. So this data that we've so far is really interesting, so look forward to getting into it.
Excellent. James.
Yes, I'm James. I work in the retail team at SafeCharge Nuvei. Those of you who don't know who we are, we're a global payment service provider. We build best-in-class payment experiences for customers all over the world and focus very much on retail. We connect people to over 350 different payment methods globally, helping to localize that experience. And last year we processed over 34 billion in transactional volume. So obviously very interested in the subject matter. We too have seen a lot of change and been working closely with Andy and the team at IMRG to track it all through.
Excellent. So what I was kind of showing there was that online has boomed, right? We all know that. There's no secrets there. But the thing that I wanted to kind of get into, right, is if we're now entering this phase where online has more competition, so there's more things you can spend your money on, there's also a hell of a lot more competition. I wish I had this statistic in my head, but there was some story that came out, I think maybe it was earlier this week actually, and it was the amount of new businesses that are selling through an online channel, and it was something like, I don't want to perjure myself too much, but I think it was like 10,000 extra companies or something like that. So there's a lot more competition out there. So the thing for retailers then is what are they now going to do with these increased competition to keep what they've got and ensure that they can make the best of what was a very surprising situation. Brad, do you want to go first?
Of course. I think first priority in my view is always to acquire new visitors. That's, always priority number one. Priority two, I guess, comes with keeping that return rate, keeping that purchase rate up, and focusing on brand and loyalty is the key driver around that. So I see a lot of activity in past few weeks. We've seen a lot of activity, especially with stores starting to either struggle or reopen. Store staff have seemed to start to want to integrate themselves into online. I've seen a lot of kind of virtual consultancy and online booking type of scenarios come into very many retailers. And I think that's probably the wrong approach in my view for many.
What does that actually mean, online booking? As in you have to book to go into a shop?
It's essentially a virtual consultation where it's trying to mimic and replicate the experience of going into a store and speaking to a store member, a store staff. It's trying to replicate that online, and I feel that there's a way of doing it, and there's a lot of people doing it very wrong. And I feel that the intention around it from a retailer's point of view is to try and bring in expertise and bring in their knowledge from store staff online. I think that's the ambition, but I don't think it's being executed very well. My opinion on it should be much more brand focused. So use that expertise to do, webinars, live streaming on social, or focus on content creation properly, not just a weekly blog or something. Try and use that experience in a different way. I feel that should be the way to try and keep that purchase rate up and keep customers coming back to you. Build that brand loyalty, essentially, is what I'm saying.
Okay, yeah, brand loyalty. James, how about for you?
Yeah, I agree with a lot with what Brad said. I think building strong multi-channel relationships with your consumers is key, and maybe this is where the opportunities have arisen for these sort of 10,000 businesses that have started up. So really understanding who your customers are, seeing what role stores and physical presence plays, or how you can deploy staff in different ways. I think we've seen a lot of people in electronics be very successful with a sort of brand ambassador approach. So the stores in those areas are very, very important, where you want to go and actually check out a good deep knowledge, of those products that you actually have as well. What value is that adding to the consumer journey, and really understanding that. So gathering as much data analytics as you possibly can, to Brad's point, and then making smart decisions based on that. I think that's the key. I know it's not easy because there's so many variables, but retailers measure everything from the weather on a particular day to see how that's going to impact things, right the way through to seeing the change in demographics. So are you selling to that 20-year-old that you think you are, or is it their parents that are buying it on behalf of them? And how do you build your user experiences around all of those people?
We've seen some really interesting data around our retailers believing who their customer was, and then when it comes down to it, that loyalty piece comes through, and their customer is not who they think they are, and their demographics are very vastly different, and that affects the whole business. So you're looking at the B&M, you're looking at marketing, you're looking at the full funnel of the company, and that demographic is often misunderstood. So I feel like retailers should, if they don't already, have a better understanding of who their customer is.
So should they be using then this kind of period as a we've all got to learn, haven't we, what's going on there? And I suppose there's a sort of research process then that you have to go through to work out where you are now, and it might not be where you thought you were. I mean, I think an interesting thing about this pandemic is this idea of the new normal. It's almost the worst term ever, isn't it? But to what extent it's changed things, and to what extent it hasn't, right? So I think quite a few people sort of have this idea that you just sort of go back to what you were doing before. Okay, you've got to wear a face mask, but you just crack on. Has anything actually sort of changed, or do you now need to think that things really have properly changed now, and I need to build, I had these trend lines that I was following, but maybe some of them are a bit meaningless now. How can you understand that?
I think things have changed. I think the settling in period, if you like, that initial shock of God, we hope this just goes away, and the fact that it hasn't. People have been trying different things, and also with the traffic shifting online, obviously it's more easy to gather the data. When someone comes to the store, ironically, even though you're face to face with them, you don't very often get much data out of these people unless they're prepared to fill something out. So maybe that's given people the wake up. So Bradley saying that they're not who they think they are. Maybe with that traffic shifting online, there's a better ability to do that, but also the fact that we have to do something. And I've been really impressed with the whole retail industry. Everyone's been changing, everyone's been very innovative, and trying to be as efficient as possible with time and automation and understand it. So I think the people who are winning in this situation or making the best of it are definitely adapting and changing very quickly.
Yeah, to that point, I would say a key driver I've seen useful is personalization, which in many people's opinions is useful from a customer's point of view. They don't really see it useful from a retailer's point of view. Internally, personalization actually gives you a hell of a lot of value because you understand a little bit more around what people need and want. Trying to give them or put products in front of them that are unnecessary or not correct, build your approach around personalizing your campaigns and your targeting to each of your users, and then learning from that in terms of what they want. I feel, flipping it on the head a little bit, that's a good place to start and gives you really good data and insight.
And I think you could tell actually with some retailers when this stuff came in, they were very quick to merchandise the sort of product that you would then be looking for. So never mind the new in stuff that we really wanted you to see. We're going to show you desks and monitors and whatever it was, the laying around at home type clothing sort of thing. That was some very smart sort of shifting that went on. But in order to do that, you obviously have to have that stuff. You have to be agile enough to sort of move around. So maybe that's another lesson that we've had to get on the screen. I agree.
And I think with Brad's point about personalization, it's that whole messaging, that whole what's important to one person isn't to another. It might be the hygiene in a store. Am I going to come and visit the store? Is the delivery going to arrive on time? There's all these different things that are going to be important to people at this stage, and this is a good opportunity to trial it all out.
What do you think then is going to happen with the stores then? Because we've kind of had this, the impression that I get is that you've now got a lot of volume online, and I think that's what people are doing. As you can see, even as things are opening, it's still very, very strong growth that we're seeing online. But the shop, if you go to a shop, perhaps not a supermarket as much, but a sort of non-essential, it tends to be a very focused journey. So that the footfall will be massively down, but the people who go in there, they're sure as hell buying something, because they're taking that risk and might have to queue. It's a bit of an annoying experience and all that sort of thing. So, what happens then? Are we going to get to a point where eventually we do just go back to the shops and then it kind of comes down, or where do you think this sort of balances out?
James, you go first.
Yeah, sure. So, I think it's going to be case by case. I think some purchases are much more considered. So I've seen groceries 50% up year on year in terms of June transactions. I think that will stick to a point, because you don't really want to necessarily go to the shop every week, or I certainly don't, to buy my groceries. So I've been converted, if you like. But whereas then if I'm going to buy a car or a new laptop or a Louis Vuitton bag, I'm probably going to want to go and see that and enjoy the whole experience of it. So I see a transformation. I don't see the high street just suddenly shutting down, and God, I hope not. And we've all got a responsibility to look after that. But I do see potential downsizing in some areas, turning it maybe more into a showroom experience rather than carrying stock and having all this extra space in central London that's costing you money. But really case by case, and what value is that store adding? And I think this is the whole point about data, really understanding what value that store is bringing in your chain. And it could be much higher than you think. So before you quickly shut it down, I think really understand what role it plays in the whole purchase journey. And if it isn't the end point, it might well be a very key decision-making point along the way. I don't know about you, Brad. Sorry.
Oddly, you could also see that while we had this sort of city centre approach, because everyone was kind of working in there, you can see what's happened with companies like Pret, where they built all their all their outlets around sort of office space and things like that, they're now empty. So Pret, which was this fantastically successful company, is now in really quite bad trouble. And you could see almost that the local areas where they were really struggling to get footfall and getting the shops work, you could almost see that would be maybe where more people would go. Because if we are going to be at home more, then perhaps those kind of areas, people still want to go out and get a sandwich. A lot of people can't be bothered to make their own sandwich. So there'll be that kind of thing. And maybe that then is like the revival of the local area, which is the complete reverse of where we sort of thought things would go.
Yeah, I think a lot of it walks hand in hand with the commuter traffic as well. We're not going to the office, most of us. So, that's stopping for a coffee on the route. However, your local village, as you say, I think people have become very protective and don't want to see our high streets all boarded up with nothing there. So maybe there's a social responsibility there on behalf of the consumers as well as the retailers to talk about, what we're doing to protect it all.
I think it depends on product type, I think it depends on sector and product type, because there are some retailers that have done particularly well throughout this and will have probably seen not much of a shift, offline versus online. I think that's probably stayed fairly central. We've seen a real mixed bag. We've seen across our platform, GMV is skyrocketed for a few, even a few kind of more fashion retailers. And then for others, it really hasn't, and they've seen massive declines. So whether stores reopening, I don't feel like the shift will really return fully to where it was. I feel like we've been on a trajectory now over the past 4 months that will slow, but it's definitely not going to revert. So I feel the shift, the share of e-com now sitting up, whatever it is, 20, 30, 40% globally, I feel like that won't really reduce. I feel like if anything, it's going to increase, but slightly slower, over time.
I agree. And I think what we've seen in the payment side of things as well is that these numbers are slightly skewed because people have had time to focus on different regions. So you may have activated China, for example, and suddenly your sales have gone up online because it's all done via that channel. So for some people, it's been a case of how quickly different regions have come out of lockdown. Spain came out before the UK, for example. So I think we'll need a few weeks of analysing this data to see if there's any other trends in there. But I totally agree with you. I think the shift is done now. I think people are educated. Certainly the older demographic, you only have to look at contactless payments in Italy to see that has changed massively, where what used to be a completely cash run society on buying an espresso, that's going to be done on a contactless payment now. So this whole shift is continuing to move, and we've got to be able to aim at every single person out there with online payments, not just focusing on who you think the customer is.
Particularly perhaps because, it seems like what they're saying is that this thing isn't going away, right? So it's, you can go outside and stuff at the moment. You can't go to a football game. You can't go to you can go to a cinema again, I think, can't you? You have to sit 5 seats away from somebody or something like that. You can see a situation where younger people can sort of go out and start to do stuff again and go to a football game. You might have to wear a mask and all that. But the slightly older generation, though, maybe it's a bit tough for them. I'm not sure that they'd be able to do that because, they're the ones who are really threatened by it. So, them being engaged with online now, it might be the only recourse they actually have to do this stuff. They might not have a choice. Kind of interesting for them.
It's definitely a concern. I saw a stat yesterday, I think from Ernst & Young, that said it was like 64% of people still don't have the confidence to go back to stores. And I'm not sure the demographics on that, but I still think there's a lot of concern about. I'm sure Brad's got a bit more insights into that.
Yeah, for me, it's interesting because I believe there's a way that a retailer can innovate a bit too fast. And you look at some sites, particularly some fashion sites, who have spent the past 4 months tinkering with the site and making it do all the things they probably wanted it to do, for many years, and they've invested a lot of money there. And for me, I don't feel that's really improved the customer experience, because what actually customers want probably is a little bit more simplicity. They want, especially for them demographic types, where you've got an older demographic who wants to build confidence in a brand. They don't want to have to spend 4 hours trying to check out. They want to spend 10 minutes once they find a product, if that. So it is interesting, and it is the different demographics of obviously a different take on different sectors, but it has been interesting in our view,
The digital content of it as well, just making it easy for people to buy online. I think, whole sizing technology, there's so many things out there, the out of the box videos you see on YouTube. There's lots of ways to just inform customers about what this product is versus the old fashioned way of assuming they're going to come to the shop and try something on. So I think there's a lot of things you can do out there, and it's best to talk to people like Bradley and the experts in different spaces to figure out how you can get these people to first of all find you, and then really resonate with that audience, get them to trust you, and then hopefully go on and become a long-term customer.
That's it.
And Andy as well, he knows a few things.
Yeah, absolutely. Tune into the podcasts.
We've got a question in from the crowd there. Are we willing to name names as a thing? So are there any retailers that you would kind of put a name on where you think they've done really well, they've navigated this thing well? In terms of performance and marketing, I don't know, Brad, if you want to take that one. James, up to you if you want to chime in.
Yeah, there's a few, of course, of our clients that have done particularly well. There's a few strategies that have been put in place. One in particular, who locks down pretty early on. They stopped trading online for several weeks, 3 or 4 weeks. They stopped trading for. However, the strategy they put in place was still allowing a customer to add product to their basket. And on basket, they then asked the customer if they wanted to leave their email address for that basket to be emailed to them once the checkout was enabled again. So that allowed for firstly, data capture, amazing. Secondly, it allowed for them to contact customers and have a really strong trading period as soon as they came back online. So instead of easing in, which was in retrospect probably a better way of doing it, because they wouldn't have had tens of thousands of orders coming in that first day, which is what happened, and they were absolutely inundated. But that was a really interesting strategy, and worked for them because they had one of their best trading days this year. That then, I feel, as slowly as that trade slowed down a little bit, and I feel that particularly sectors like clothing, where that was the situation, there was a limited availability on orders or limited availability on stock, products were then purchased, and then that's it. So for particular types of clothing, that's definitely slowed down, and I feel like purchase rate and return rate of customers will be less than it was in the past. So that was one of ours. We've had a few other clients that have done particularly well. Some knitwear clients have done really well, which has been interesting, but more fashion clients really haven't. Other ones that I've noticed, I mean, we mentioned B&Q earlier. B&Q, in my view, have done a fantastic job from a trading perspective. I feel like their comms has been absolutely amazing, and they've really kept abreast of keeping the customers aware of what's going on and what availability is. So that's probably one of mine. I don't know, James, if you have a few.
Yeah, I mean, I'm probably not going to talk about our customer base and payment options and things like that, but I think just generally in the industry, people I've seen who've done extremely well. If you look at Lululemon and Uniqlo, I think we spoke about this on another podcast, Andy, but talk about RFID, radio frequency tagging, so able to actually turn your stores into distribution centers. So it's kind of been coming, and people have been doing it before, but I think they've been able to accelerate. I don't know how year on year growth is affected, but they've certainly mitigated the problem of stock going out of date, being able to actually keep some of your staff retained and going to the stores to deliver from things. And then you've got other companies like Gymshark, who've just used the kind of social responsibility, I think, rebranding as Home Shark and different things like that in order to, get some good publicity from it, but also encouraging people with a social message. And across the board, I think that social feeling is very important. The audience now, you've got to be transparent. People are going to find out about your supply chain, as we've seen. And are you a reputable player that they want to work with? They want to know who they're buying from. So I think the people who've done best out of this have been the people who've communicated really clearly. And as Brad mentioned, B&Q getting to that point of operation pretty quickly, servicing both the trade and consumers really clearly, where the government messaging hasn't been clear, going out there with an absolute clear.
How dare you?
How dare you? But at least they've had that clarity, and I think that inspires confidence and trust.
Yeah. Okay. So we're just going to bring this to a bit of a conclusion now. Just 1 minute, if you can give us. Like, if I'm thinking about where I'm going to prioritise my investment to, get through this, on my feet kind of thing. Where should I focus at? Just 1 minute. Brad, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. Data. 100% data. So business data and business intelligence is by far the place where every business should be focusing on. Without that, you don't understand what's going on within your business. By data, I mean capture every single interaction possible, capture as much engagement with your brand as you can, ask for feedback as much as you can, try and understand, take this time at where we are now, take the time to understand who your customer is and who you want your brand to be long term. And that all starts with having a good data set. And then you can use that to, delight customers in the future, surprise them, give them better loyalty, give them back things that you learn about them. All starts with data though for me.
Okay, James?
I totally agree. I think data is the source of it all. It's the holy grail, if you like. But then it's all the stuff we've been talking about, messaging, personalization, localization, everything, it all drives back to this whole point. Do you know your customer? What is it that's important to them? Clear messaging, reassurance, that you're here today and you're going to be here tomorrow as well. So if I buy some goods, it's going to arrive. And I think just learning what we've learned so far is going to be massive in mitigating any problems if we have a second wave, which we may well do, but I think we'll be far better prepared for it, particularly in the supply chain, distribution chain, the fulfillment side of things. So I don't think it's all doom and gloom. I think that's the underlying message for us. And if there's anything you want to review in any way, shape or form, we're here. Bradley's here, IMRG are here to field those questions and see how we can help. All
right. Excellent. Well, thanks a lot, fellas. You can still ask questions, by the way. I'm just going to show you some more data, and there's a chance for a bit of Q&A as we go a bit further back. Sorry, I shouldn't have killed myself. So I'm just going to show you a few more graphs, and then we can please fire in questions if you've got them. We'll try and deal with them at the end there. So what we looked at earlier was the year-on-year growth rates, some week-on-week stuff, in terms of percentage shifts. What I'm going to show you here is slightly different, and I'll kind of explain it. Hopefully it makes sense. But this here, it doesn't have a y-axis on it just because it would be too confusing. But this is the amount of millions that are spent by week within our sample. Okay, so this is the total market, and this is week 1 through to week 28. Week 28 was the most recent month, the 5th of July. And as you can see, it kind of goes up and down a little bit. When you get into March proper, you get that kind of uptick as you might expect. But each month isn't really the same. Okay, so you don't always, you do get these kind of dips and troughs throughout the year. But when we move into March and April, those numbers are way up on where they would be relative to last year. So you can see that everything's at a slightly elevated position as of sort of week 15 forward. What happened in week 28? As you can see, it is somewhat down. So there was a bit of a drop there. It's a drop of about 10% or so moving into that week. So you can see there what it actually kind of means. Now, the interesting thing for us, of course, is to look at what is going to happen over the next few weeks. So I guess, because I know it's July, but it's retail, so we've got Christmas coming. You've got to start thinking about this stuff. So it is very interesting to see what's going to happen with these rows. And I'm just going to show you by a few categories as well. So the first one is clothing. Clothing, as you can see there, that experienced the sort of sharpest dip when you went for week 11 into week 12. There was one week there when it was down 40% at one point, and it really dropped away. And then it has recovered, as you can see. It's kind of come up a bit, but only just started to get into positive territory. But even so, if you look at week 28, it's still down slightly on where it was last week. So positive year-on-year growth, but week-on-week it was actually down a little bit. So we'll have to just see what happens with clothing. But it is on some kind of positive trajectory. And then the next one I think is electricals. Electricals is one where you see this really sharp kind of shift. So if you can see there, if you go from week 11 to week 12, just a massive kind of increase there. And if we were to compare week 12 2020 with week 12 2019, it really is astronomically up on where it was. So electricals is seeing growth rates of sort of typically 70-80% week after week. So massive growth there. But if you look at week 28 there, as you can see, the last sort of 3 weeks or so has just been coming down a bit. So the minute that we got into the lockdown situation, you see this massive increase because people are having to buy the things that they need at home in order to do stuff. You know, the signal boosters and the keyboards and the monitors and all this kind of stuff. But it is an artificial inflation of that stuff. At some point, you know, it's not a frequent purchase you're going to keep doing. At some point, I guess we're going to run out of steam a little bit. So just some signs there that one is running out of steam a little bit. And then the final one I was going to show you here is Home and Garden. And once again, you can see they're really, really big. It wasn't quite as fast as electricals, week 12, week 13. There was a bit more of a climb there, but it's remained at a really, really high level, as you can see all the way through the pandemic there. And then if you look at week 28, probably the biggest fall that we've seen in any of those categories there. So the thing with Home and Garden is it is a reasonably expensive purchase. And now that you can go on holiday, and you might be spending on that type of big ticket stuff, maybe this is one of those where you know, you're not going to buy the sofa after all. And maybe we've done out our gardens a little bit as well. So, you know, can Home and Garden stay at that really elevated position, or is it going to sort of come down a little bit there? I think that's another one that is slightly prone perhaps to just running out of demand steam a little bit there. So I think that's all the stuff I had. Yes, it is. I just two things that I wanted to flag up to you that we've got coming up. If you're a retailer, we've got this thing next week called a virtual roundtable. It's a new thing that we're bringing in. So it's Tuesday, 11 till 12 o'clock. I think we have like a couple of seats left if you wanted to. There'll be a little scenario like this. We're having a good old debate about marketing effectiveness during crisis period and how things have changed. Do you need to change? Just carry on doing what you're doing before. How do you deal with the increased competition, etc.? On our website under events, you can go and register for that. Ditto next week. So next week we're looking at customer retention. And of course we do our weekly update anyway, so you'll get to see what's happening demand-wise and whether that's coming down a little bit. So a couple of questions that we've got in. We normally have Olympics by now. That's made me really depressed. Can't believe we're missing the Olympics. How would that affect the results, James? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question. Not just the Olympics as well. All sporting events with the Euros would have taken place by now, and then of course we'd have the Paralympics to follow. The Olympics, Wimbledon, I think would be on, or would have been on, and all of these things do tend to spike activity in sporting goods in general and leisure facilities. Having said that, we've had a massive spike in leisure goods anyway, I think, because people are at home and being forced to think about more about their health and fitness. So it's a very hard one to answer at this stage, but this time next year when we've got that data, it'll be interesting to see what the true impact of that's been. And of course, with no one able to really travel and fly out to Japan, that's massively impacted all of our customers at Heathrow Airport, for example, because there's just been no footfall. So it will have a big impact.
Yeah, and for the Olympics, we have looked at this before and looked at some categories. So do you see, for example, a kind of boom in electricals and things like that? And yeah, it is true that you do see a bit of an uptick with TVs and things, but you do get some sort of nasty stories as well where people, they buy a TV and then when England get knocked out, back come the TVs kind of thing. So, because it's usually 2 weeks in. But the thing that happened with the last tournaments, like the World Cup in 2018, where we actually did pretty well, it was also really hot, and there was a sort of notable impact on sales just generally. So the online sales growth for May was really strong then. It was like 18% or something, which I know it doesn't seem much now given where we are, but back then that was actually very strong growth. It was strong as it's been for quite a while. And people were also going out and spending quite a lot because it was really hot, and people were going out to watch the games in the pubs and all that sort of thing. So there was quite a spending frenzy going on. Yeah. But it was also related to the weather and the general. We had like a royal wedding and all that sort of thing as well. So there's this whole sort of, well, hey, it's good to be British kind of thing. Which you don't get. I
think we'll see quite a delayed opportunity happen because, of course, Olympics and big sporting events inspire a lot of people to start sports. So there's that demographic of people who would be getting into sports or were waiting for the opportunity to be inspired, who then would see things happen and go out and buy things. That has been delayed. That won't be happening this year. So that whole period between now and maybe next year or the year after, whenever these events start to happen again. That's a long time for a lot of retailers to wait for those customers to come back to them, or just come to them in the first place as new customers. So I think there's going to be a lot of retailers who struggle in their markets just because of that delay. It's going to be interesting.
Definitely, yeah. Well, they'll have planned for it a long time ago as well. So those shipments have probably come in, and there's a lot of stock sitting there with particularly technical equipment. Yeah. So it's an interesting thing. And then also when you relay that onto things like Glastonbury, the effect of not having these festivals, or some reason to go out and buy some fashion items or some Wellington boots or whatever you need to get through the British summer.
I actually still kind of had Glastonbury, really, because I'm a bit older now. I've got a kid. It's a bit more difficult to go. But they showed, massive coverage on BBC. And although it wasn't on, they just showed a load of repeats. So I just hung around in my house drinking lager and watching that. So, as far as I'm concerned, it did go ahead.
I put the tent up in the lounge. It was great.
Slight technical question here. Women's wear and men's wear, we showed them split. So why do we have clothing as well? So clothing is all clothing in one, but then we also have subcategories of clothing as menswear, women's wear, lingerie, footwear, and accessories, fashion accessories. So clothing is everything all together in one. Women's wear is quite a big segment of that, incidentally. It's quite a lot bigger than something like menswear, for example. Someone just saying they think the webinar is brilliant. There you go. Got to read that one out, obviously. Has there been any shift towards tablets with more older customers shopping online? So we could have a bit of a dig into mobile one week. We haven't done it so much here, but it hasn't really manifested itself. No, the early thing that we noticed when we first went into lockdown was that there was a lot less actually on. I think smartphone fell lower than we thought it would be, but it has really come back really very strongly now. Tablet sort of not so much really, and I think what's happened with the tablet, in my personal experience, is it's that thing that you give to the child to shut them up really, because it's an entertainment device, isn't it? They can watch apps and see BBs and all that sort of thing on it. So I think that's kind of where that's gone. It's like the kids' device, that thing. I'm not sure it was designed for that purpose, but that's where it's ended up for me. But so we're not seeing a massive increase there. Thanks very much for your questions. Just going to the final one. There's our contact details should you wish to follow up with us. And thanks for joining us. Hope you can join us next week. And James and Brad, thanks very much for joining me.
Thanks, Andy. It was a pleasure.
Cheers.